Okay, so you guys have been sending in tons of stuff about IELTS reading and especially those matching headings questions.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? I mean, they can be kind of a pain sometimes, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. And it's so interesting, right? Because they seem so simple at first glance,
Right.
but they trip people up all the time.
Yeah.
And your sources actually touch on why that is, right? They say it's because all the headings kind of sound the same, and also because you always have more headings than you have paragraphs.
Yeah.
So it just really sets you up to second guess yourself, basically.
Totally. Yeah. So for today's deep dive, we're going to focus on this one thing, right? We want to give you some real techniques that you can use to tackle these questions and hopefully improve your score without having to understand like every single word in the text.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump right in. And the first thing the material talks about is this idea of using the example.
Right. So this is like a basic tip, but it's a really important one.
Okay.
If the question gives you an example, and most of them do go ahead and cross out that heading.
It sounds like almost too easy, right?
It is.
But it's true. Like, that's one less heading that you have to worry about,
Exactly.
for the rest of the paragraphs.
One less thing to think about.
Yes.
One less thing to get confused by.
Yeah, and the material actually points out that the example isn't always the first paragraph.
Right. You can't just assume that. You have to
Yeah.
look and see where it is.
Right. So that's important. Okay, so the next basic tip is this idea of like getting a sense of the overall task,
Okay.
right? So like looking at the number of questions you have and then the total number of headings.
Yeah. So you want to count how many paragraphs need a heading and then how many extra headings you have.
Okay.
And this just reminds you of that really important rule,
Yeah.
which is that each heading can only be used once.
Right.
You're never going to find a heading that perfectly matches two different paragraphs.
Yeah. Okay, so this is all about like setting yourself up strategically, right,
Yeah.
before you even start reading the text.
Right.
Okay, so now let's get to what I thought was like the coolest part of this whole thing.
Okay.
And that's this idea that you don't actually have to read the entire text to answer these questions.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you don't have to understand every single word.
That's such a good point, and I think it's really about changing your mindset.
Right.
Right. Instead of thinking, oh my God, I have to read and understand every single word.
Yeah.
You can focus on specific parts of each paragraph, and that's really what this technique is all about.
Right, and so the material says you should really zero in on the first, second, and last sentences.
Exactly.
And that's kind of like, it's like the highlight reel of the paragraph.
That's a great analogy.
Right. And the first sentence, it says, often acts like a mini introduction.
Right, like a little preview of what the paragraph is going to be about.
Right.
And then that last sentence, it says, usually acts as a mini conclusion.
Yeah.
So basically, you get the introduction at the beginning,
Yeah.
you get the main point somewhere in the middle,
Uh-huh.
and then you get a little summary at the end.
Perfect.
So that's your focus.
Right. Okay, so we have our strategy, right?
Right.
We cross out the example heading, we count the headings and questions, and then we focus on those key sentences.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's actually see this in action with the first example in the material.
Right.
And it's this one about wildlife and big trees.
Okay, yeah, so for this example, you have three potential headings.
Okay.
The first one is how wildlife benefits from big trees.
Uh-huh.
The second one is how large trees are being destroyed.
Okay.
And the third one is how to support a functioning ecosystem.
Okay, so the first sentence of this paragraph says, large trees are an essential part of any successfully functioning ecosystem.
Okay.
So how do we start, like, connecting that sentence to our list of headings?
So we start by looking for connections, not just like exact word matches.
Okay.
So in heading number 1, you see the words wildlife and benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first sentence doesn't use those exact words,
Yeah.
but the idea of something being an essential part and contributing to a successfully functioning ecosystem,
Yeah.
that strongly suggests that there's some kind of benefit.
Right.
So there's like a conceptual link there
To heading one.
to heading 1, right?
Okay. What about how this first sentence relates to the other two headings?
Okay, so heading number 2 is all about how big trees are being destroyed.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in that first sentence that even hints at any negative impact or destruction.
Okay.
So it's probably not a good match.
Right.
And then heading number 3 talks about how to support an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Now, the first sentence does mention a functioning ecosystem.
Yeah.
But it doesn't give any advice or instructions or methods on how to actually do that.
Got it.
So at this point, headings 1 and 3 are still possibilities.
Okay.
But heading 2 is probably out.
Okay, so even with just that first sentence, we've narrowed it down.
Right.
Okay, so now let's look at the last sentence of this paragraph.
Okay.
It says, this allows the trees to support a substantial proportion of the life in the forest.
So now we're getting even stronger evidence here.
Okay.
The word support echoes the idea of benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And then life in the forest obviously relates to wildlife.
Holy.
So heading number 1, how wildlife benefits from big trees is looking really good right now.
Yeah, so how does this last sentence help us with heading number 3?
Okay, so remember heading number 3 is about how to do something.
Okay.
It's about taking action.
Yeah.
But this last sentence just describes a consequence.
Uh-huh.
It just says that the trees support life.
Yeah.
It's not giving us any steps to take or anything like that.
Okay.
So that makes it less likely that heading 3 is the correct answer.
Okay, so the material also says we should look at the second sentence for like extra confirmation.
Right.
And in this example, it says, without the trees, innumerable species would be left without habitats and would cease to exist.
Wow. Okay, so that's even more support for heading number 1.
Right.
Right. So innumerable species is directly related to wildlife. And then the idea of them losing their habitats and not existing anymore, that really shows the benefit of the trees.
Totally. Yeah.
Because the trees are preventing that from happening.
Right.
So yeah, I think we can be pretty confident that heading number 1 is the correct answer for this paragraph.
Okay, perfect. So that example was pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But the material also includes this other example about trade unions in the UK.
Yeah.
And this one was trickier, right? It shows that not every paragraph is going to be that easy.
Yeah, you're not always going to find the answer that quickly.
Right.
Sometimes you have to look a little deeper.
Okay, so the headings for this example are working conditions in the UK,
Okay.
the benefits of being a member of a trade union,
Uh-huh.
and declining membership of trade unions in the UK.
Got it.
So the first sentence of this paragraph says, trade unions provide an essential defense against exploitative working practices.
Okay, so what's interesting here is that this sentence could actually connect to a couple of the headings.
Oh.
So you got the phrase working practices,
Yeah.
and especially when you combine that with exploitative,
Yeah.
it could link to heading number 1, working conditions in the UK,
Okay.
right? Because working conditions are all about the way people are treated at work.
Yeah.
But then you also have the phrase trade unions and essential defense,
Right.
which could point to heading number 2, the benefits of being a member of a trade union.
Uh-huh.
Right. Because a defense implies some sort of positive advantage.
Okay.
So, yeah, so this is one of those cases where the first sentence alone doesn't really rule anything out, for sure.
Right. So we need to go deeper.
Exactly. We need more information.
Okay. So the last sentence of this paragraph says, a large decrease in the number of members means that trade unions currently have far less influence compared to the height of their power in the 1980s.
Okay, so now heading number 3 is looking much more likely.
Okay.
So that heading is declining membership of trade unions in the UK.
Yeah.
And that sentence talks about a large decrease in the number of members.
Uh-huh.
So that matches up really well.
Right.
Headings 1 and 2 still don't seem to have a clear connection to this sentence.
Yeah.
There's no mention of general working conditions
Okay.
or specific benefits of being a union member.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think heading number 3 is looking pretty good right now.
Okay, but let's say you read that last sentence and you're still not totally sure.
Okay.
The material says that's when the second sentence can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's the tiebreaker.
Right.
So what's that second sentence?
It says, yet due to a lack of awareness surrounding the benefits of joining a union and an increase in temporary working member, union membership in the UK continues to fall year on year.
Okay, so that basically confirms heading number 3,
Right.
right? Because it says union membership continues to fall.
Yeah.
And that's just another way of saying declining membership.
All right.
Now, heading number 2 does mention benefits,
Mm-hmm.
but it's talking about a lack of awareness of those benefits.
Right.
And that lack of awareness is presented as a reason for the decline in membership.
Yeah.
So it's not really what heading number 2 is about.
Yeah. It's like a different angle.
Exactly. It's a different angle.
Okay. And again, there's nothing here about general working conditions in the UK.
Right.
So heading number 1 is still out.
Yep.
Okay. So these two examples, they really show how focusing on those key sentences,
Right.
the first, last, and sometimes the second sentence,
Right.
can really help you figure out what the main idea of each paragraph is.
Exactly. And it's not always going to be the same sentence.
Right.
Sometimes the first sentence will be enough.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes you'll need the last sentence.
Yeah.
And sometimes that second sentence will be the key.
And so let's do a quick recap of what we've talked about so far.
Okay.
So the main idea is to really focus on the beginning and end of each paragraph.
Yeah.
Right.
Read those sentences carefully.
Yeah, and try to figure out what the main point is without getting lost in all the details.
Right. And don't just look for exact word matches.
Yeah.
Look for synonyms and related ideas.
Right, because like we saw essential part can imply a benefit.
Yeah, they're not synonyms, but they're in the same kind of semantic field.
Totally. And the material also says something really important about shared words.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
Right, like just because a word appears in a paragraph in a heading doesn't mean they're a match.
Exactly right. You can't just match words.
Right.
You have to make sure the context and the meaning line up.
So you have to ask yourself, is this paragraph really about what the heading is describing?
Right. Or is it just using some of the same words in a totally different way?
Totally. Okay, so what if you've done all that and you're still not sure about a paragraph?
Right. So you've looked at the key sentences,
Mm-hmm.
you've looked for synonyms and related ideas,
Yeah.
and you're still stuck.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is usually just move on to other paragraphs and questions.
Okay.
Because as you start matching headings to other paragraphs,
Yeah.
you're going to have fewer options left.
Right.
And that can sometimes give you the extra information you need to go back and figure out those trickier ones later.
So it's like a strategic way to manage your time.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the last piece of advice in the material is to make sure you answer every single question,
Yes, always answer every question.
even if you have to guess.
Right, because there's no penalty for getting it wrong.
Yeah.
So leaving a question blank doesn't help you at all.
Right. Even if you can only narrow it down to two choices,
Yeah.
just pick one.
Right, you might get lucky.
Okay, so let's wrap this up.
Okay.
We've really gone deep into some techniques for those matching headings questions.
Yeah.
And remember those key points.
Yeah.
Focus on the beginning and end of each paragraph. Look for synonyms and similar ideas.
Right.
Don't be tricked by identical words alone.
Yeah.
Be strategic about moving on if you get stuck.
Right.
And always answer every question.
Every single one.
Okay, so those are all things that can really help you with this specific type of question.
They can. And your sources really emphasize this point, that the key to getting good at this is practice. So the more you actually use this technique with practice passages, the faster and more intuitive it will become.
Right. So for our final thought today, I want to ask you this.
Heck yeah.
How could you use this idea of like identifying key information by focusing on the most important parts of a text?
Okay.
How could you use that in other areas of your life?
Wow, that's a great question.
Right, because we're constantly bombarded with information, right?
All the time.
And being able to quickly understand the main point of a document or an article or even an argument just by focusing on those crucial parts.
Yeah.
That seems like a really valuable skill to have.
Oh, absolutely. It's like being a more efficient reader.
Right.
And I think that's becoming more and more important in today's world.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for today's deep dive.
Awesome.
We hope these tips and techniques were helpful, and we hope you'll join us next time for another deep dive.
Yeah. See them.
Bye.